Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 265 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melissa Lieberman, and today we're talking about the 8 pathways to a full pipeline for you as an independent consultant. This is really important because so often we don't think about and really intentionally think about what is the mechanism we're leveraging or the 2 mechanisms we're leveraging to fill our pipeline. And we operate off of assumptions. And I don't want that for you. You might be doing it and not realizing it. And I want to bring it to your attention today. So to be clear, we're not implementing 8 pathways. That is too many. But you are choosing from 8 pathways so that you've got a very intentional, clearly thought out and well-defined process for you for lead generation. Where this came about is so often when I ask independent consultants, like when I say to you, lead generation, that phrase lead generation, what comes to mind? I ask this question. And so often consultants will say, oh, cold outreach or LinkedIn Navigator or reaching out to strangers, right? Those are the types of things that come to our mind right away. For you, when I ask you, when you hear lead generation, what comes to your mind? What is the answer? It's so important to know that answer because that's how we're just associating lead generation with most likely something that you don't like, right? If we think that in order to be effective with lead generation, at some point, we're going to have to do some form of cold outreach or some form of doing something we don't love doing. And so we end up either forcing ourselves through it and hating it and then quitting and not being consistent, at least with lead generation. Or we just decide we're not a salesperson and we wait for referrals or word of mouth instead, or some form of all of those, right? And none of this is a strategy. But here's what's actually true for independent consultants is that cold outreach is certainly one way you can build a pipeline, but it's not the only way. And it's definitely not even the best way for independent consultants, most of us. I can tell you most of the consultants with heavy and healthy pipelines aren't doing cold outreach at all or very selectively. And we'll talk about what very selectively means here in a minute. There's other ways to fill your pipeline. And that's what we're here to talk about today. You do not have to do any kind of cold outreach to be successful. There are other ways to generate leads for your consulting business that are so much more effective and long lasting because you're not hating it. And that's what I want to walk you through here today so that you can figure out which one of these actually fits you. There's 8 of these pathways. I've organized them into 3 categories. And the categories matter. We'll talk about what they are here in a minute. We want to help you find the right pathway so that this is a process that will be long lasting for you, one where you can be consistent, that fits how you work, who your clients are, and where your business is right now in the growth trajectory. That's important. The consultants you know and even don't know, those consultants with full pipelines are not doing something you can't do. I'll repeat that again. It's so important. The consultants that have full pipelines are not doing something you can't do. The consultants with full pipelines don't have something you don't have. You are capable of doing this. And I want to walk you through these pathways today to show you what that actually looks like so you can start realizing that you're capable of this too. So the agenda for today is we'll go through the companion resource. So you've got support as you implement this episode. Then we'll talk about those 3 categories that the 8 pathways fit into. So you can think through very intentionally what makes the most sense for you and your business. What are these categories of lead generation as you're choosing your strategy? Then we'll dive into each of the pathways in more detail so you can understand exactly how to build a pipeline and how independent consultants build pipelines. Then we'll talk about how to identify which pathway fits you right now. And this is really important. You might have some pathways in place right now. Maybe they're working some of the time, but not all of the time. listen through the pathways, but make sure that you're listening to the point where we're talking about how to identify which pathway fits you right now. That's the key. When you're implementing pathways, it doesn't mean that they're forever. It means that they work in a certain phase of your business. And we want to talk about which of those phases make the most sense at what phase in a business. Which of those pathways make the most sense at different phases of your business. So that's really important. We'll talk about that after I dive into each of the 8 pathways. Then we'll talk about a couple of mistakes that you want to avoid. These are the mistakes that kill every pathway. So you don't want those either. So definitely stay to the end for those 2 pieces, especially if you're someone who is got a process for your pipeline. It's not feeling sustainable, or it's not always predictable, or it doesn't feel as repeatable as it could be, or it's not getting the results that you're looking for. Those are so important to hear and think through for your business. And then we'll wrap it up with how to put this episode into action. I have 3 specific steps for you. Okay. The companion resource for today's episode, I have 2 of them. The first is the Lead Generation Effectiveness Scorecard. If you haven't taken this, or if you haven't taken it in a while, I highly recommend you go and take that scorecard. It is something that will help you to highlight where are the areas of opportunity in your lead generation system in your business. You can go to pipelinescorecard.com and take that assessment, that diagnostic, and it will give you a report with what's working well in your business. So often we overlook that. And then also where your areas of opportunities are. So again, pipelinescorecard.com. And then, of course, the April sprint, if you're listening to this live, is open, the April lead gen sprint. So you can go find the details around that at consultantsprint.com as well. So 2 companion resources here for you today. Okay, let's talk about the 3 categories. So first, we want to zoom out a little bit and talk about what are the 3 main categories. If you're thinking about lead generation, really, what does it boil down to? And those are, number 1, relationship based. These are the lead gen strategies that are based on relationships. And you could argue every type of lead generation strategy within an independent consulting business is relationship based. And it is at a macro level, but this is where you're building intentional and maintaining intentional relationships. And we'll talk about the pathways that fall within that here in a minute. This is the starting place if you're brand new to independent consulting, or if you're at a spot where you want to convert from staff augmentation to consulting, or you want to shift what you're offering. So you might have been doing more project-based work and you want to shift into advisory. This is where the starting point is, that particular category. Highest trust, lowest barrier, fastest to conversations. That's category 1, relationship-based. Again, we're going to go into the different pathways that fit within this category. So you've got some very tangible examples of what that means. Category 2 is channel-based. This is where you are building relationships with other organizations and people who already have the trust of your ideal clients. And they help generate conversations that come to you. We'll talk more about what that means here in a minute. And then the 3rd category is visibility-based. Visibility-based. This can be the slowest to build, but it compounds over time. And this is what creates inbound opportunity to make your life easier over the long run. So we've got relationship-based, we've got channel-based, and we've got visibility-based. These are the 3 categories that our pathways fall under. Let's talk about utilizing these 3 categories. The category matters more than the specific tactic, in the sense that if you're picking the wrong category for your stage, even the right pathway we're going to talk about here in a moment won't work necessarily, right? If you're brand new, then focusing only on visibility is going to leave so much opportunity on the table where you could have landed clients that are what I'll call the low hanging fruit, right? Because the category 1, that's the relationship based, those pathways fund the business, while your category 3 pathway is building. So, most consultants, when you're hearing as I go through these pathways, think about it from this perspective. Most consultants need a pathway, one pathway from category 1 and 2, and then one from category 3. So, that's a way to think about this as we're going through it. I'm about to share with you these 8 pathways. For sure, we're not doing them all together. For sure, we're never doing all of them at all in your business. They're for what you want to be picking and choosing from that will be a repeatable process for you. And after I go through all the 8 pathways, I will tell you how to choose which 1 to 2 of these will make the most sense for you and your business. Again, based on the where you're at in the growth trajectory of your consulting business, of the maturity curve of your consulting business, and also what will resonate with your ideal clients, and quite frankly, what you want to be doing for lead generation as well. What you want to be doing matters. Okay. So those are the 3 categories. Again, just to recap them: relationship based, channel based, and visibility based. So when we think about relationship based, the pathways that go into this category, there's a few of them. The first one is your warm network activation. Of course, these are the people who already know and trust you. And maybe you haven't talked with them in a while. Maybe it's been a few months. Maybe it's been a few years. Maybe it's been a decade. However long it's been, these are the people, though, who already know and trust you. And for most independent consultants, this is where their first grouping of clients come from because they already trust you, right? And because of that, that's the fastest path to your next client, your first or your next client. These are former colleagues, former bosses, former clients, corporate clients, professional peers. The only thing standing between you and the conversation is the awkwardness that you might be feeling about reaching out. I'll say it again. The only thing standing between you and the conversation with people in your warm network is you feeling awkward about reaching back out to them. You worried about how they'll think about, is this a transactional? Do you want something? You're only reaching out because you want something. You thinking that they won't want to help you, that they won't want to talk to you, that by you reaching out to them, they might not think you're successful. These are the types of thoughts that I so often hear from consultants that prevent them from either reaching out at all to people in their warm network and rekindling that relationship or strengthening that relationship. Or even if they're doing that, and you might be doing that, but not making it effective. It reminds me of the being in high school or middle school and those kids who maybe go to someone's house and toilet paper the tree in the front yard and run away. It's kind of like that. You talk yourself into reaching out to someone in your warm network, and then you have a call with them, but you feel awkward about telling them what you're doing or making an ask of any sort because you don't want them to think that you've just reached out because you have a business now, which in some part you have. So it's kind of like you at the end or so, if you even talk yourself into it, you quickly tell them what you're doing and ask if they know anyone to connect you. And it's like you throwing the toilet paper on their tree and running away. I have a middle school boy. He's not toilet papering anyone's house, but for whatever reason that example is on my mind. And to be clear, I never toilet papered anyone's house in middle school either, although some of the boys in my class did. So, anyway, the point here is we want to get to a place where it feels relationship oriented, where it doesn't feel transactional, and where you can be honest with someone, of course. Hey, listen, I've thought of you over the years and feel so regretful that we haven't reconnected. And now I'm running a business. It's been such a great opportunity to reconnect with people in my network, right? So look at this pathway. And the other thing I want to say before we move off of this pathway is for so many consultants, you may not be new. You might be thinking, well, I've already exhausted my warm network. And if you're thinking, I've already exhausted my warm network, this pathway doesn't apply to me, I really want to challenge you on that because for the most part, none of us have exhausted our warm network. That's not even a thing, really, right? There's no way that you've talked to everyone in your network, you've rebuilt relationships, you've maintained those relationships, you've added value to those relationships, and nothing is coming from it. And it's a quote unquote waste of time to continue doing that. That's just not a thing. So think about, if you're dismissing this, what is the area of opportunity here where you can continue cultivating those relationships and get better at activating opportunities from those relationships and adding value to those relationships. So you are the first person that they think of when their organization needs something that you do, or they hear other people needing the type of work that you do. Okay, so that's the first pathway, warm network activation. Pathway number 2, past client re-engagement. This can be one of the most unleveraged assets in consulting businesses. And the reason why is the thought process, they'll reach out if they need me. I'll say it again. The thought process, they'll reach out if they need me, is the one that kills this pathway. These clients, your past clients, already know what it is like to work with you. You're not starting from scratch. You're picking up off where you left off. Because so often we close a project and move on, and we don't have a conversation about what would it look like? What other areas of the organization have you witnessed that need the type of work that you do? Where is a peer within the organization to your stakeholder who might be facing the same kind of challenge? What is the next initiative that you think they should be looking at that they might be overlooking? All of a sudden, we become more passive when it's our existing client in some ways, because we think that they'll ask us if they need whatever it is that we do. And we overlook the opportunity to use this as a consulting approach to say, listen, I'm noticing this in the organization. Is this something that makes sense to talk about what it would look like to tackle this thing? I don't think the organization is making it as a high a priority as it should be. And I'm worried about the ramifications of that. The thought process, they'll reach out with if they need me, is a huge killer for you. The other way that you can think about this too is that so often, you know this, so often our stakeholder moves on to another organization. So then, rather than saying, well, I don't have any stakeholder in that organization anymore, you think about it the opposite way. Now you have double opportunity, in the sense that the existing client, how do you build relationships within the organization where your stakeholder left? You've got a history there. And then also, where did your stakeholder go? Now you've got another opportunity in a new organization. But this requires intentionality. Building a pathway, a repeatable pathway of how you're going to tackle this past client re-engagement or existing clients continued engagement. I'll say them in both of those ways, of course. And then the third way that you can be thinking about relationship based lead generation is the referral activation pathway. And this is a flavor of your warm network, of course, but there's a difference between getting referrals and running a referral pathway. There's a difference between you having word of mouth and you running a referral pathway. One is accidental and one is a system. You don't want to be hoping for referrals. You want to engineer them. Putting a intentional and repeatable process in place if you choose a referral type pathway, so that it is easy to refer you, so that you're not expecting the people in your network to do the heavy lifting for you. It's not their job to make the connection of, oh, John does this type of consulting and I'm hearing this problem. Make that mental connection and connect you to the person. There's so much effort involved in that. And most of those people that would refer us, while they have great intentions, they've got a lot on their mind. Making that connection is not necessarily at the top of their list, right? So you putting a pathway in place that is intentional, that helps to drive referrals, helps to create a top of mind scenario, that helps it to be valuable to the referrer. That the key here is you want a pathway where it's valuable for the person referring you to another organization, that introduction is valuable to them versus a risk to them, a risk to their reputation. Building this out in a way that's valuable is incredibly important. And this is not a just checking in process or let me know if you hear of anything. We say this so often. This is you having an intentional pathway around building referrals. If that's something that you believe is a viable pathway for you, and we'll talk here in a minute about how to decide if that's true or not. Okay, so those were the relationship based pathways for lead generation. Now let's move on to the second category, which are the channel based pathways. Really come down to one of them, which is referral partnership channels, of course, right? This category of referral partnership channels can be incredibly valuable, can be incredibly effective, and can be much more efficient than you having to build all of your own referrals, of course. So you might choose to, when you think about two pathways, you might choose one of those first three that I just shared with you, along with referral partnerships. And by partnership, of course, it doesn't have to be a formally structured, legally set up partnership in that sense. What this is about is referring business back and forth with organizations who have already built the trust with your ideal client. It might be other consultants where you're working a bit as a collective, might be with people who are in adjacent type of service that where they offer something that your ideal clients need that isn't overlapping with what you do. It might other be vendors that work with that same client, like software vendors, for example, or other kinds of companies who work with your same client that aren't necessarily other consultants. You thinking about who has already built trust with my ideal client, who already has a stellar reputation within this industry, who already has the ideal client on their calendar, and then building a valuable partnership with that organization or with that person in a way that benefits both of you. And this can take a while, and this can take some kissing of frogs. But when you get to the point where you have a couple of these in your belt, where you've got an intentional process around it, this is not just about agreeing, oh, we'll send each other work if it comes our way. This is about building an intentional process where you're comparing pipelines on a monthly basis, for example, and strategizing about how you can help each other, perhaps even working together in the sales cycle or creating a whole campaign with that organization. And by campaign, I'm not talking about an ad campaign. I'm talking more about, maybe you're doing some speaking together, and then that leads to a valuable next step for the audience, and then ultimately a pipeline that you work together to close or somehow divide up the leads from that activity and so on. This is about building an intentional process for creating and managing a pipeline. This is like a pipeline within your pipeline, if you will. So think about whether referral partnership channels is one of those pathways that would be really valuable for you. Again, I'll tell you how to choose that here in a minute. Okay, now we're moving into category 3, visibility based pathways. So the next pathway within category 3 is speaking. Of course, speaking. This is one of my favorites. Of course, this is one of my favorites. I have a podcast. This is you getting in front of audiences of your ideal clients. And I want to say this to you really clearly. Oftentimes we go to the most extreme in our mind, like standing on the stage at a Salesforce user group. That can be part of this, but there are so many other opportunities to speak in a way that gets you in front of audiences of your ideal clients in a very nimble way, in a very repeatable, effective way that doesn't rely on you submitting speaker proposals and hoping that you get selected. Again, you can definitely do that and augment it with speaking that is something you could do every other week or once a month to truly build a pipeline and build inbound leads for yourself. You don't need a big platform. You just need the right room, and room can be virtual. These are forums, webinars, lunch and learns. Thinking of yourself as an expert and going out and finding those places where your ideal client is attending and building relationships with the people who are creating that content or responsible for facilitating that content, I should say, and building up yourself a speaker calendar. This converts faster than almost any other inbound pathway once you've got it up and running. And I recommend this to almost every consultant that I work with. And the friction that I often find is it's one of those things where we just think, oh, I'll get to it. And then we just don't. I'll get to it. It doesn't feel as pressing. But the more you can put a priority on this and build a repeatable process around landing speaking opportunities, the more that you set yourself up for really high quality inbound leads and ultimately to build yourself a reputation for someone who's known for and sought after the work that you do. But it requires you to overcome any kind of imposter syndrome. Doesn't mean that you have to overcome it, forever. It just means you've got to overcome it enough to be willing to go out and find speaking opportunities in a really creative way and making valuable offers to the marketing department, for example, at those organizations, and getting yourself into a queue of speaking. It will pay off in dividends. Look at this pathway. Okay. The next pathway under the visibility category is community and association presence, including events. So this is you being in rooms or organizations. So it's either events or organizations, associations, peer groups, roundtables, online forums. This is you actively participating in communities where your ideal clients already gather. Now, I want to be really clear about this. This is not about you participating in other groups where other people are also selling things and you're all talking to each other about what it is you're selling. No, this is about you being in communities where your ideal client is in attendance, industry associations, peer groups, executive roundtables, those online forums, Slack groups. There's so many of them in this day and age, right? Your ideal clients are gathering somewhere. The question is, where are they gathering? What organizations and associations do they value? And then you showing up consistently enough so that you're building a reputation and they know who you are and they seek out your advice. So that when you're at events, for example, you've got a very intentional plan. I had several clients go to the Transform HR conference a couple of weeks ago, and we made event plans for them. Like, what exactly are you going there? Like, we don't just go to these events and say, or be members of these associations and say, well, I know the people I want to work with are in the room. I think eventually they'll start seeing me as the go-to person or the go-to consultant. No, this is about making an intentional plan so that you get out of it what you came for in the sense of business development and relationships. So that's the sixth pathway, is that intentional participation, active participation in associations and communities and events where your ideal clients are amassed. The next one, pathway number 7, which is also about visibility, is about content and thought leadership. This is about posting on LinkedIn or having a newsletter or a Substack or a podcast. But this one is a more advanced pathway. So you want to be choosing this pathway when you know what your niche is, when you have a specialization. It doesn't have to be perfect. And of course, it can change over time, but you want to know what you're speaking about and who you're speaking to so it's not so generic and watered down. This can be the slowest to convert of the pathways, but it creates an asset for you that you're able to accumulate over time. Your intellectual property helps you to think through, in a higher level about what it is you offer to your clients and why it matters and how it's different from what the norm might be. It's a forcing function for your, CEO level thinking. in addition to generating revenue, but it does have a longer runway. So you want to, when you choose this pathway, you want to put it in place and commit to it for a year at least, so that you know, okay, this is going to take some time and consistency and experimentation, but it will pay back because you build your reputation. The key here, though, is making it actionable. You don't want to just be posting or writing or publishing and hoping that people will reach out to you. You want to have a valuable reason for them to reach out to you for the type of expertise that you provide. And creating that intentionality or that entire ecosystem around what you do is really important. This is not just about posting or writing. This is about having and building an intentional pathway around it. And the last pathway, we talked about this on episode 262. So if you want to go back after this and listen to that, if you missed it, I would encourage it. But this is about outreach, but in a much more specific way, not massive cold outreach. You can certainly test that. I've had clients testing it. Sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't, even despite refinements. There are certain times for certain industries that cold outreach can work. However, with that being said, that is not a pathway that I would recommend starting with. It's not a pathway I would recommend relying on. It's a pathway that I would recommend that you experiment with a little bit if you want to. But one of the best ways to get into this pathway is what I will call the dream client outreach process. That's what we talked about on episode 262. This is where you're having targeted, intentional outreach to a specific person at a specific company for a specific reason. This is not a mass process. This is about you thinking about your dream client and how can I get as scrappy and creative as possible to get on their calendar. This is like the cherry on top. This is not your ultimate, the one you rely on. This is the bonus that feels fun because it's a challenge, not something that you're relying on cold outreach to fill your calendar. And I find that most consultants either skip the specificity of this dream client outreach process or quit too early. You've seen that image before where you've got the miner and he's got this huge tunnel that he's used a pickaxe to build and he's thinking about quitting. And there's like maybe 4 or 5 more strikes of the pickaxe before he hits the gold. It's the same kind of thing. Not going far enough or not figuring out how to be scrappy enough to get on the calendar of those ideal clients, of those dream clients. So that's what this pathway is about. A much more controlled, a much more specific, a much more inspiring approach to cold outreach that augments what the other pathway that you might have already chosen, like your warm network activation or referral pathway. This one can be kind of the cherry on top of any other pathways that you've selected. Okay, so let's talk about choosing the best pathway for your organization. And I'll frame it to you in a couple of ways. The first is you're building your employer of choice. We talk about this on the podcast frequently. You chose to leave corporate. You chose to build your own business. Let's not recreate what you hated about corporate because you think you have to. So choosing the best pathway involves the intersection of these 3 things. Number 1, your preferences. This doesn't mean that you love any form of lead generation, but at least pick one of the pathways that feels the least vomit inducing out of all of them for yourself, or what you think you could do ultimately in a more consistent way. Like right now, maybe it feels like a huge heavy lift to get going with speaking, but kind of deep down that if you can get it going, that it would be something you would love doing over the long run, then let's do that. Let's overcome the initial hesitation. Then that intersects with what resonates with your ideal client. What do you think would most resonate with your ideal client if you had to triage these pathways? And then what do you think is the lowest hanging fruit right now? Again, I wouldn't go with thought leadership if you are newer to at least creating your own pipeline. Maybe you've been in business for a while, but you haven't created the control over your own pipeline, you've been having a lot of word of mouth type clients, then go work on the warm network activation. This is about where you're at in your business right now and where you think the lowest hanging fruit is, and figure out the intersection of those to choose your best pathway. I'll give you another way to think about this path, what the best pathway is for you. If you think about the trajectory of your business, if you're early stage, again, that might be you're pretty new in the business overall, or you're newer to having control over your own pipeline, then choose one of those pathways in the relationship based category, like warm networking, referrals, past clients. If you're more established and you have a clear niche, go start conquering one of those visibility pathways, speaking, associations, thought leadership. I want to reemphasize we're not putting all of these in place ever. You do not need all 8 of them. In fact, that will dilute everything you're doing, right? Pick those 2 pathways, a relationship based one or a channel one and a visibility one, and go all in on making them effective for you and your business. You might be at a place where you've plateaued or you want to shift what you're doing from more execution based to more advisory based, for example. Then look at the channel partnerships and your dream client pathways to help you push through that plateau, for example, or move into landing different type of work. Okay. So I've talked with you about the categories, the pathways within the categories, how to choose the pathways. Now let's talk about, I'll give you one last way to identify your pathway, and then we'll talk about those mistakes. And then we'll wrap up with talking about how to put the episode into action. Ask yourself, when you're thinking about identifying your pathway and selecting that pathway, where have your best clients actually come from in the past? What activity doesn't feel like selling for you? Maybe you love conversations. Pick pathway 1 or 2. Maybe you love building relationships. Pick pathway 3 and 4. Maybe you love writing or teaching. Pick pathway 1 and 7. Because we don't want to choose the pathway you're going to dread, but also to recognize that most of us don't feel incredibly comfortable with all of these from the outset. So you don't want to let those initial limitations or hesitations stop you from pursuing the pathway that you know over time, once you feel confident and it feels like your norm, that you would enjoy most of the time executing. And then the third question is, how does your ideal client actually buy? Do they respond to referrals? Do they engage speakers they've seen? Do they take recommendations from trusted colleagues? Of course, they're rarely replying to cold messages. If you choose that pathway, know that you can use that dream client approach to the cold message pathway. So it's very targeted, very narrow, very specific. You want your pathway to match how your clients actually buy. So those are the 3 questions that you can be asking yourself as you're choosing the pathway or pathways you want to pursue. And now let's talk about the pathway mistakes you want to avoid. And there are 2 of them. Number 1, this one kills me. It happens so often. Not recognizing your pathway is working. You might be thinking, I don't have a pathway going right now. I've been relying too much on word of mouth. And that might be true. And you're likely doing things that you don't realize creates clients for yourself. I hear this so often. And I know in the early days, I did this to myself too. Well, that client doesn't count because, I used to work with them, or that client doesn't count because it's a slightly different type of work than I want to be pursuing. Or for whatever reason, oh, I had coffee with that person just catching up and it ended up turning into a client. I can't repeat that. So it doesn't count. That's not a repeatable process. It was a fluke. When you're not counting what you're doing and zooming out and saying, wow, wonder what I'm doing here that can be repeatable. I was talking with a consultant the other day. She was having this exact problem. And we just simply summarized this to, I meet with people in my network, in my large network. I get introduced to people and I meet with people that I already know. I build a relationship with them with true, genuine curiosity about what's going on with them and their organization. And I make, valuable offers to help them. And it might not be a paid offer. It might be, hey, let's sit down for an hour and talk through that challenge you just mentioned. And over time, that value turns into clients for them, for that particular client. It didn't feel like a quote unquote lead generation process because it's so fluid, so relationship based, but it is for that particular consultant. So you want to be thinking for yourself, what are you not counting? And recognize that likely whatever it is that you're not counting is the beginnings of a pathway for you. So identify what's already working and work to systematize that rather than saying, oh, this doesn't work or this doesn't count. This isn't quote unquote a real lead generation process. So I should go put one in place with LinkedIn Navigator or cold outreach or something like that. No, don't do that. Just take what's already working for you and systematize it. You're not starting from scratch. The last thing I'll say about that is get clear on what's already working and stop calling it luck. Okay, the second mistake that you want to avoid is blaming the pathway for your lack of results. I'll say it again. The mistake is blaming the pathway for your lack of results. So you might have chosen a pathway. Maybe you have a warm networking pathway in place. Maybe you've got a speaking pathway in place. Maybe you've got a thought leadership pathway in place, but it's not giving you the result you're looking for. And so you start to question, well, maybe I should choose a different pathway, or maybe I'm not good at business development. I don't know how I'm going to ever take control of this. The pathway is not the problem almost all of the time. The pathway is not the problem. The actual problem is inconsistency. And because you're not consistent, you don't have enough data. So then you don't have enough data and findings and learnings to tell yourself, okay, wait a second, I'm going to shift this thing about my pathway and see if I get a different result. You just throw the whole thing away and try to start over again. Or again, think that somehow now you have to get on LinkedIn, and messaging people. And of course you don't want to do that. So then you just don't do anything. Consultants with full pipelines don't just know their pathway. They've built the pathway. They've implemented it. They use it as data to figure out what's working and what's not working so they can continuously make micro adjustments. That's the key here. So don't blame the pathway for your lack of results. That's the second mistake. All right. This is a bit of a longer episode, but hopefully this gives you some thinking here today, a really meaty episode on choosing the type of lead generation process you want to be implementing for your business, how to choose which one that will work best for you right now in the growth maturity that you're in, and then putting it in place by avoiding those mistakes. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage you to do these 3 things and sit down and write them out on a piece of paper. Don't just think of them in your head, because writing things down makes the outcome so much more effective. That's a side note. Okay. Answer these 3 questions. Where have your best clients actually come from? What doesn't feel like selling? What do you want to be doing once you get over the initial hurdle? What do you want to be doing for the long run with your pathway? And how do your clients actually buy? And then intentionally select and define your pathways, 1 or 2 of them. Choose them for the next quarter or the next 6 months. Think about when you're doing that, what pathway are you already running? That's one that you might have been discounting or thinking is just luck that you don't have control over, and decide to count that and build around it. So intentionally choose your pathway and begin implementing it so you can have that data and you can adjust from there. Make those micro adjustments until the pathway is humming along and working for you and you have a consistent, repeatable business. All right. If you would love to have a structure for this, come and join me in the Lead Gen Sprint. You can find that at lgsprint.com for leadgensprint.com. Would love to help you if you want help with this. Otherwise, go take those actions this week and get your lead generation process under control. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.